Наші Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там пивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Yes.
The Leaf Street Army sends its regards.
Русский военный корабль. Предлагаю сложить оружие и сдаться. Русский военный корабль, иди нахуй.
Наші
шануєм і ми, браття, у своїй сторонці. І душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу. І покажем, що ми браття козацького роду.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And welcome back, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 529 of the news, and it's good to see you all once again. And of course, it is the best night of the week. It is Fundraiser night.
And of course, we are going to be covering the past 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine here on this Sunday night. But before we get into any of the breaking news tonight, I, of course, have to let all of y'all know that tonight is the Sunday Fundraiser night. And I know that many of y'all don't really need to know that because we have already made it way on up there in the fundraiser. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but let me go grab it real quick. And according to what I'm seeing, it is at least $1,000 on the mark right now. An impressive number. And this fundraiser is being run for Doctors Without Borders. Doctors Without Borders is by far one of our favorite nonprofits to support on this channel because not only do almost all of their funds go to actual field work, something around, I believe, 86% to 92% of it, if I remember the number correctly, they have also been helping out massively in Ukraine since the very first day of the war. And y'all's support to this fundraiser goes directly to Doctors Without Borders and helps them to continue on the amazing work that they've been doing inside of Ukraine since the very first day of the war. I've already put in my $100, so if anyone's looking to try and match my donation, $100 is how much you would need to send in if you want to match mine. But of course, the goal tonight is $5,000. We've already reached 1,000. I think we're already on our way towards about 1.1 or maybe even racing towards 2,000. But hopefully we can blow this thing out of the water again tonight because the Leaf Spring Army has never missed a fundraiser goal in the history of its existence. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on into the breaking news today, and we're going to be, of course, covering the Russian army being crippled today, largely by a pretty interesting Ukrainian attack, but we're going to be working our way around to that because we've been getting some news and interesting, I guess you could say follow-ups on a lot of the breaking news that we've been getting over the past several days. And I want to make sure that we jump around to those and continue to cover those stories for all of y'all so that way y'all know what's actually developing with those stories. One of those stories that we actually never covered on stream, but we did cover in a war summary video made by Enforcer Matt, was the striking of a Russian ship at the port of Novorossiysk. That was actually a military transport ship, and the damage that it sustained was severe, and apparently so severe that they have not been able to tow the ship back into the harbor of Novorossiysk. Since that attack, it has been sitting outside of the harbor, almost sinking into the water. It has a very strong list, and right now, it appears that the Russians are trying to find some way to save the ship instead of letting it sink under the waves. And we can see a satellite picture here showing the efforts that they've been putting in to try and stop this ship from rolling on over and sinking to the bottom of the sea. This is a satellite picture, apparently taken by Earth Cache, showing the Rapucha class ship right here that was hit earlier. We can also see that additional ships have apparently been pulled up alongside it, and we can see these here, a crane ship and also some other kind of auxiliary ship, and two smaller ships that we don't really know a lot of information about, are here beside the ship, trying to keep it upright in the water so that way it doesn't list so far over to the side that it just sinks at port.
Man, I was thinking when I was looking at it the first time, it looks like they're trying to prop the thing up. And is that what they're actually doing?
Yeah, it's actually what they're doing. They're using the crane to try and keep the left side of the ship above the waterline so that way it just doesn't list on over and capsize at its mooring.
Man, that's so jank. That's the Russian way.
Dude, that is the Russian way, man. And right over here, we've got Project 22160, and I'll go pull that one up for y'all, Project 22160, to show y'all what it's moored beside. And it's one of the more modern patrol ships that the Russians have. I gotta be honest, it looks like it took some inspiration from the Freedom-class littoral combat ships that the United States has fielded and is now decommissioning due to massive issues with the hulls and their construction. But nevertheless, this is one of the few modern ships in the Russian Black Sea Fleet, and it's sitting right alongside a ship that has not really had that much of a good fortune recently. And of course, I'll also be showing y'all the Rapucha class, so that way y'all can get a better idea of what ship was actually hit. So this is the Rapucha class landing ship. These ships are used for Russian amphibious landings if they were to ever try and attempt one, and would largely carry the troops and equipment close to the shore and then drop them off near that area. So it's pretty important for Russian amphibious operations and also power projection around the world as far as the vessel's class is concerned. We also have the picture, and I'll see if I can scroll down here. Maybe they have it on Wikipedia now, and it looks like they actually don't. So I'll be going out here to the naval news story that shows the listing ship out here right outside of Novorossiysk. You can see how far the list was leaning to starboard before it was brought into Novorossiysk. And it also gives y'all a really good idea of why they can't just leave the thing moored at the harbor, just tied up to the dock. If they tried to do something like that, the ship would not survive. It would either collide with the harbor, and then that would further exacerbate the list, most likely, to starboard, and then at a certain point, y'all may be interested to know this. This is actually something I did not know. If a ship leans too far to starboard or port, like we're seeing right here, if it lists to, wait a minute, is it the port side? Oh, wait a minute.
Yes, the
oh
port
my God,
side.
I got it
flamed.
wrong.
I got flamed for that. I said the left side in the video. I had no idea everybody knew like which side was what, so I got flamed. I learned it was port though. I'll never forget it.
Everyone's telling me it's port. I'm so sorry, everyone. I got it wrong. I'm doing the Royal Navy thing where they say turn to starboard and it's to port. It's stupid. I know. I'm very sorry. Nevertheless, it's listing to port. And what's very interesting about this is that if they tried to moor it up at the harbor without giving it some kind of support, it would most likely hit the port. It would list farther over to port, and then it would sink. Because there is a certain point, there is a certain angle that ships can lean at to both sides that will end up capsizing the ship because the center of balance is now over the center of the ship, and then it'll just lean on over and sink, or capsize, better yet. And so that's why they have all of these support ships here trying to bolster this ship right here and keep it upright so that way it doesn't just capsize where it's moored right now. So, thank y'all all so much for sharing with me that I had the port and starboard sides confused. The port is the left, the starboard's the right. And now we've got that cleared up. But we also see that the future of this ship is very unclear because this thing is not in a dry dock. And I'm not really sure if Novorossiysk has a dry dock that is large enough to maintain this Rapucha class ship. And that demands answers. And those are answers that we're going to be trying to get right here, right now. As we're almost at $2,000 on the fundraiser, by the way. I just wanted to point that out really quickly because we are blowing this fundraiser up tonight. It has been blowing up. And so
That's blowing up worse than the Russians. I'm telling you,
man, our fundraiser blows up better than the Moskva class cruisers, and I gotta say, pretty good like credit right there. And we just reached $2,000. Let's go, hey! And let's get it onwards to 5,000. And moving on,
that's bombshell. Did you hear that the Russians are about to make a new submarine right here in the port?
Really?
Yeah,
it must be that
ship you see right there with the.
class.
Yep, it's about to become a submarine.
And let's see, you know, speaking of submarines, are they going to be able to stop this new submarine from happening? And that means we need to find a dry dock. And oh, wait a minute, we got one right here. That's a dry dock. And we also have another
A rusty dry dock, I guess.
You know, I feel like these are really makeshift dry docks because I don't know, they're kind of weird. Usually, from what I've seen, and maybe someone who knows a little bit about the naval world and dry docks can explain this to me because I don't really know a lot about it, but usually the dry docks we see are built into the port itself. They're not extending into the actual harbor area. They're built into this area right here where the mouse cursor is, but these are built into pretty much the harbor. So I'm wondering if these are makeshift or if there's some kind of an issue with these. I mean, hell, there's not really any massive cranes around this thing. You probably couldn't move a lot of equipment, supplies, or materials to try and repair a ship at this dry dock with, but we found a few. Let's see if we can find any others at this port of Novorossiysk. And I've got to be honest with y'all, it looks like this port is about bone dry of any dry docks beyond those. And for a ship to be repaired of the damages that the Rapucha class ship that we're seeing has, it would have to be put into a dry dock. You can't affect those kind of repairs while it's just floating at the harbor. It has to be put into a dry dock to try and repair that. So, based off of what we're seeing, I'm assuming that there's really no way to repair the ship at this harbor. They would either have to take it all the way to Sevastopol, which means that it would have to ferry its way all the way through the Black Sea over to Sevastopol to then try and get repairs. And I don't really know how big the dry docks are at Sevastopol port and whether they could support that ship. I have a feeling that they can because the Black Sea Fleet is based out of this port, so they most likely have the repair facilities here. For example, this massive dry dock. And you can see what I'm talking about right here. This is actually a good point. Notice how this dry dock is built in land, and the cranes here along the dry dock are far larger and probably rated to carry heavier materials, heavier parts, and therefore it can actually repair a larger number of ships of all kinds. We can even see what appears to be a small cruise ship inside of this dry dock right now, and it appears that it's being filled, or the ship just entered the dry dock, and they're now going to start emptying the dry dock of water, so that way they can then set the ship up and get it ready for repairs. Nevertheless, we can see that Sevastopol could most likely repair this ship, but it doesn't appear that Novorossiysk would have the same fortunes. And I have to reiterate this again. From what we're seeing right here, this dry dock, I don't know why I said it like that, but this dry dock only has one, maybe two cranes, and they appear to be fairly light cranes, probably not rated for heavy tonnages. And so, to be able to repair the Rapucha-class ship, you're probably going to need larger cranes that can carry heavier materials to be able to effect repairs, and we're not really seeing that in Novorossiysk. And also, Mike D said that this is a graving dock with 2 A's. So, let me type that in off screen. Graving dock. Because we need to find out what the fate of this ship is going to be. So, a graving dock is the traditional form of a dry dock. So that one's the one that's actually inland, and this is also a dry dock as well, apparently. We're actually learning a little bit about dry dock terminology. And so...
I see folks keep saying floating dry docks.
Interesting.
So this is basically, under that premise, a big barge.
Apparently so. Apparently it is some kind of just a massive barge right here. So we're hopefully going to find out more information. I'm going to try and do more research on this. I don't know when I'll be able to do that because tomorrow is going to be a very busy day for us. But I will be trying to do more research on this and figuring out if they will be able to repair the Rapucha-class ship right here. Otherwise, this thing may be stuck in Novorossiysk for the rest of the war in this configuration with ships trying to hold it up so that way it doesn't list too far to port. And it may be out of action for the rest of the war. So... we don't really know right now for sure. They may be able to take it to that dry dock we're seeing in the port and repair it, but we're going to do some more looking and research on that before we get a clear statement on any of that news. Nevertheless, moving on from that little follow-up to that interesting bit of news, we're now going to be moving on into Russia itself, because we've been seeing some interesting things happening here. For example, we actually have been hearing, of course, from the Russians as usual, and good God, DCC Prime just put in $200,
Whoa!
getting the fundraiser up to $2.4 thousand.
Nice.
And Matthew
We're
literally
halfway there.
And Matthew literally just did the enforcerized version of "Oh, wobble anyways,
Oh, man, that voice cracked so bad. Oh my goodness.
It wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. Well, I sound like a creaking door over here. Anyways, this is something fairly interesting because many of y'all have always been hearing about Russian nuclear threats. And a lot of people always like to pick that up and run with it. And every once in a while we pick it up and run with it. But sometimes it seems like the threats may be getting a little bit more into the realm of seriousness based off of what's happening. But somebody has actually made a categorized list of all Russian nuclear threats apparently over the past year, 365 days from now to last year. And the list is pretty extensive. Here it is.
Damn.
So, let's see here. Medvedev said on the 30th of July 2023. Actually, wait a minute. This goes all the way back. This goes all the way back to 1999.
Man, these people that compiled this, they brought their receipts. Man, they've got records of everything.
Dude, they do. And it appears, interestingly enough, Reuters is the one that reports on this the most. At least according to this list.
Wow.
Dang. But
Good on Reuters for reporting it.
But let's see here. Yeltsin gives U.S. nuclear warning. That was in 99. Then in 07, Russia threatening new Cold War over missile defense. But let's skip forward to the 24th of February of 2022. That was really the first day of fighting inside of Ukraine in this war. EU says Putin's ominous threat to those who hinder him marks critical moment. And then from there, we can see that almost all of the nuclear threats the Russians have ever made have occurred during this war over different stuff. And also, West must stop encouraging provocations to avoid nuclear disaster. Russia says seized Ukrainian lands are under its nuclear protection. That, by the way, was after they, fake annexed the territories inside of Ukraine. That's when they made that statement. Let's see. Russia official warns of World War III if Ukraine joins NATO. Kadyrov says Russia should use low-yield nuclear weapons. Medvedev raises specter of Russian nuclear strike on Ukraine. Moscow not threatening anyone with nuclear weapons. That's rich. And then you have the entire list above and below that showing all of the nuclear threats that they've made. But nevertheless, you can see that nuclear threats from Russia are something that is pretty common. It's about as common as Kim Kardashian getting a new boyfriend, which is pretty common, as many of y'all have seen. But nevertheless, this really shows you how much stock you should put into Russian nuclear threats, because everyone's always going, oh, what if this one's real? Look at all the ones that never happened. All the way from the 24th of February all the way up till the present day, there's probably about 30 of them there, and none of them have been followed through on at all. And so there you have it. There's your nuclear threats, and there's the validity of them. None of them have ever been followed through on. But nevertheless, that doesn't stop the Russians from doing what they do. We did hear today that apparently the Kremlin wants the war to keep going, and that's according to Fytuk's News on Twitter. They said, currently, there are no grounds for a peace agreement with Kyiv. The operation in Ukraine will continue for the foreseeable future. For the Russian government...
They're trying to save face at this point, because just yesterday, weren't they saying they wanted to entertain peace talks?
Yeah, they did, I think. And now they're saying that it will continue on for the foreseeable future. And for the Russian government, the foreseeable future is the next 3 months until another armed uprising happens, and then everything's kind of up in the air again about how long everything will last. But nevertheless, although the Russians have been threatening nuclear war and they are just the strongest in the world, and then the real life picture is just showing the different situation where they have no money, they really don't have a military at this point that's well trained or even has any equipment. And we're seeing all of that, and apparently they're now going to say that the war will continue on for the foreseeable future. I don't really know how the Russian public is going to take that. I honestly wouldn't take that all too well if I was in the Russian public, but, I don't really think they have much of a choice. And it also appears that they're kind of getting a little bit desperate, because something we would have seen earlier is if they had made that statement, it would have added in something like, we're going to win in a couple of months anyways, so why even bother with peace talks? But we're not seeing that anymore. They're just saying that the war will drag on infinitely, and they really don't know when it'll end. And that's how that statement was worded. But, of course, Russian industry may not last that long. We did see that another factory caught on fire in the outskirts of Moscow, and this one appeared to be burning to the ground. We can see that right there. And that's that thick kind of smoke that when you breathe it in, you go, I've got health issues for the rest of my life. And we can see the fire continuing to burn. And then that's the end of the little video right there. But nevertheless, I gotta say, that's pretty nice to see that they were able, whoever was able to catch that factory on fire. And hopefully it was one that is going to start hindering the war effort more and more as the Russians need more and more equipment, because they're largely losing it or getting it destroyed on the front lines. Moving on out of Russia, however, something interesting that came out today is the raising of Poland's military budget. And some of y'all may not know this, but Poland is actually one of the largest spenders per capita in the NATO world at this moment. And in between 2022 and 2023, they have absolutely skyrocketed in military spending. And also a lot of the toys that they're getting for their armed forces are stuff that is really impressive, even beating out many other countries inside of Europe. And hell, even, to talk a little bit more abstract rather than just the militaristic side of things, paired with Polish economic expansion and growth, some people are actually saying that Poland is going to become the next European superpower within the next 10 years, probably with an economy big enough to even rival the French or the Germans. And that is pretty high praise from a lot of people. A lot of people are having some big projections for the Poles. And we can see here that in the NATO military budget, and this is a infographic here talking about Poland's increase in military spending, we can even see now, by GDP per capita, they are even beating out the United States. The United States spends something around 3.5% of its GDP annually on military spending. The Poles have bumped theirs up from a modest 2.5%, all the way up to a whopping nearly 3.9 to 4%. The biggest spender.
They're not playing around.
Yeah, the biggest spender in the NATO alliance per GDP percentage is Poland. Shockingly enough,
Followed up by Greece, out of all places.
well, sadly though, 2022 to 2023, Greece bumped theirs down massively. It went from like 3.8% to 3%. So they're
That's still a lot for Greece, because didn't they just like go bankrupt like a couple of years back?
yeah, we have no money, spend it on the army. So they they did go kind of broke. You know, they ran out of a little bit of money, but we can't really complain.
Kind of broke.
They kind of ran out of money a little, but nevertheless, they do spend a decent bit of their GDP on the military, out of about the $20 that everyone shares amongst each other in Greece. I'm just kidding, by the way. They've got like a GDP of, I would say, it's like, well, let me go check. Let's just go get the number. Greece GDP. 214 billion, and that's down from 355 billion in 2008. A little unfortunate, you know, they've dropped down to the number they had around 2003, but, you know, they're not doing that bad. It's not, it could be worse, you know, they could be like, you know, they could not exist or something. But nevertheless, still, they spend a decent amount of their GDP. But what's interesting, though, is that comparing it to the to some other larger NATO members, the Poles are going all in. You see, NATO actually has a target that member nations are supposed to be spending by, and that is percentage of GDP that the nation is putting into national defense. And we can see that there are only 4 countries that are above that 2% target. Poland, of course, leading everyone by a massive margin, the United States, Greece, and the United Kingdom. Some of the countries that you would think would be big spenders in NATO are actually falling below the GDP target. France, Germany, Canada, Slovenia, which is a bit of a minor country, I don't even know why they threw that one in there, and Turkey are all a pretty good bit below the spending target in NATO. So most of them, really, are only spending around 1.5 to 1.7% of their GDPs on military spending. One of the only countries that almost gets above the target spending goal is France at nearly 1.8 to 1.9%. And it's...
You know what's kind of misleading about this chart, though, is that, for example, the GDP of the United States is massive compared to some of these countries on this chart. And, for example, let's take, for example, Germany. They're spending, what, about 1.5% of their GDP on defense. That is such a small number compared to the United States because of the difference in GDP that, you know, the equipment costs the same. They're having to spend the same amount of money to buy the equipment, but they have so much less money, even though they're a smaller country, it really amounts to hardly anything.
And that's true. It doesn't really amount to much, but the goal of having a country spend a certain percentage over their GDP is that while these countries may be small, the thought is that if they spend over a percentage of their GDP per year, they will be able to arm their country effectively for a defense. Like, for example, the United States is a massive country. It is one of the largest in the world by landmass, one of the largest by population number, and it's the largest by gross domestic product per year. And of course, on top of that, U.S., like I said, is big in every other category: population, GDP, land size, and so on. And so when we spend around 3.5% of our GDP, we get a lot out of it. Thousands of tanks, thousands of aircraft. We have the largest military in the world by every metric, except for tanks, and, you know, the Russians fib their numbers. But moving on from that, a country like Greece is incredibly small compared to the United States. And let me go get the true size map up. I got to show you how big Greece really is, because I'm going to try and explain something here about why it doesn't really matter the amount of money they have, it just matters the percentage they're spending. And so here is the true size map, and we're going to type in Greece here, which will give us the nation of Greece, and we're going to drag Greece over to the United States. And, you know, not to go into the whole explanation here, but putting a globe onto a flat map like this makes the sizes disproportionate. So that's how big Greece would be if it was where Greenland was on the map and so on. So let's move it over to America. And Greece is about the size of the state of Alabama. If we were to take the whole thing and kind of pack it into Alabama, it would be about the same size. And so going off of that...
That's wild to see that, like, actually overlaid Alabama. I thought Greece was bigger than that.
No, I mean, like, Birmingham would be a massive city if it was in Greece. Honestly, I think it would be about as large as Athens is. Let's go back over there and see how big Athens is. Yeah, it's about the same size as Athens. Just to give you all a little bit of a perspective here of how big Greece is. It's not a big country. So, with the Greeks being a small country with a smaller GDP of around $214 billion only, spending 2% of their GDP does big things for them. Spending, let's 2%, that would be like $20 billion, I believe, somewhere around. Actually, I believe that would be, hell, yeah, that would be like 10% or so. So they're spending less than that. They're spending 4 billion, 5 billion on their military. Spending 5 billion on a military to protect an area the size of Greece is actually pretty cost efficient. They're not having to really protect anything beyond Greece, and so building up their military to be the size needed to defend Greece alone helps out the entire alliance. It's an end that is taken care of, and it's something that you won't really have to worry about beyond that. Greece would be able to take care of themselves in a defensive situation. Of course, other allies would come to help, but you don't really have to worry about it that much. Other countries that don't really spend to the target goal are possibly putting NATO into a rough spot, and also putting us into a little bit of a weaker position. Of course, the British are the only ones, interestingly enough, that spend above the 2% GDP target out of the larger countries inside of NATO. But I think that it should be important, and it should be reminded to all of these countries that spending above the 2% target goal, especially with our current strategic situation, with the growing Chinese threat in the east, and also the growing threat of Russian aggression, as we've seen in the war in Ukraine, I think that should be a rallying cry for many countries to start bumping up their defense spending, so that way the entire NATO alliance is stronger by the end of the day, rather than where it is now. And of course, NATO could end up defeating the Russians where it is right now. But we don't want to end up just beating the Russians. We want to steamroll them. And that's kind of the whole goal of getting everyone above the 2% mark. So hopefully they can do something about that, because the Poles are certainly going out of their way to just kill it. I mean, they are the best in NATO so far, GDP spending-wise. 4%. That is 100% above the target goal. And really no other country in NATO, rather than the United States or Greece, can even say that they're close to that kind of margin. And that's really impressive when you look at it. And so hopefully they'll continue to bump the numbers on up. And speaking of bumping numbers up, our fundraiser is at $2.7 thousand.
Oh, let's go.
That's pretty freaking high. And hopefully we can get it on up to $5,000. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from that little interesting graph right there inside of Poland. Great to see that they're bumping up their military spending like that, and hopefully it'll help the NATO alliance to have a very strong bulwark on its eastern frontier with the Belarusians and the Russians. With that, we're now going to be moving on out of Poland, and we're going to be moving on over here into the North Pacific. I almost said North Atlantic in my head, and I caught myself. But nevertheless, this is something that Matthew was actually talking about on his war summary today, and many of y'all actually saw that little war summary and watched it. I think at this moment it's sitting around 120,000 views. So
Something like that. It's getting on up there.
So a lot of y'all were watching that video, and this is something that is fairly interesting. Some people, of course, I don't know what it is, but some keyboard warriors always want to make everything seem like it's a nothing burger. But this is a little bit of an escalation in its own way, a diplomatic.
It's
one.
a something burger.
It's a something burger. It's a number one with cheese. And so, moving into our first little bit of news about this, we got this on Twitter from Brent S. Sadler, and let me make sure to get this here. 11 Russian and Chinese ships steam close to the Aleutian Islands, according to U.S. officials. This Aleutian Island chain, if you don't really know a lot about the geography of Alaska, is this chain of islands here that you can see out here at sea, all the way out to Adu Station. I don't know why I went all the way over there. What the hell's going on? No, stop. Stop! What's happening?
The hell?
I don't know what's happening with that. But Adu Station is as far as the Aleutian Islands go. And 11 Russian and Chinese ships got pretty close to the territorial waters of the Aleutian Islands, according to U.S. officials. The ships, which never entered U.S. territorial waters and have since left, were shadowed by 4 U.S. destroyers and P-8 Poseidon aircraft. We got an unknown number of those. It is a historical first, said Brent Sadler, a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation and a retired Navy captain, of course having a bit of experience. Given the context of the war in Ukraine and the tension surrounding Taiwan, this move is highly provocative. And of course, some people are kind of looking at this the wrong way. Some people are thinking that it's supposed to be provocative in a military sense, making it look like they're about to start invading Alaska. And that's not the goal of what they've done here. The goal of moving forces around like this is to send a message. And that message is being sent to the United States that the Russians and the Chinese don't really care what the Americans have to say or think about Taiwan nor Ukraine, and they're going to try and provoke us into even having a response of having to shadow them with a small destroyer flotilla or something similar. And that right there in its own right is once again starting to show that the Chinese and Russians are working in unison to some extent. Because notice that it wasn't a flotilla of nothing but Russian ships or Chinese ships. It was actually a joint coalition flotilla of the two, consisting of Russian and Chinese ships that got fairly close to the Aleutian Islands. And considering that fact, I think we need to start looking at this situation as a two-pronged situation again. Of course, we've kind of divided or segregated Ukraine and Taiwan into two totally separate spheres on two totally separate ends of the world that can be paid attention to separately. But that right there, as a diplomatic stance or a diplomatic show-off by the Russians and the Chinese, makes me think that we need to start viewing the defense of Taiwan as pretty much being tied in with the defense of Ukraine as well. The Chinese and the Russians are clearly trying to make the point known to the United States that they are starting to try and challenge our sphere of influence around the world and what we do. And that's a little bit of an issue. And some people think, oh, why not? You know, what's the big problem with that? Well, you know, a lot of y'all here on the internet or on our stream are here right now because you are not in the Chinese, the People's Republic of China or mainland China. If y'all were in the People's Republic of China, y'all wouldn't even have access to the show because YouTube, the way y'all see it here, is actually banned in China, and they have a similar knockoff to it on WeChat, and that's what Chinese people get access to. You can't even get access to that. And if you would like things like that to spread around the world, or better yet, you know, if you don't really jive with the Chinese government, you go to a summer camp and it's not really a fun one, and you want them to come to your country due to their influence, you know, then you might like the Chinese. If you don't like those ideas, then you should be vested in the idea of the United States making sure to protect our sphere of influence around the world, which includes Ukraine, and it also includes Taiwan. And also someone said, we have VPN. Well, in China, you know, you actually can get arrested for having a VPN. I don't know if anyone knows that. But if
There's ways around VPNs. Like, don't ever be fooled. I know some VPNs claim that there's no way around it, but there's definitely a way around it if you have the knowledge.
And do you really think the Chinese government would allow these businesses to operate selling a system that allows you to circumvent the Communist Party's laid out censorship guidelines and internet system without having a backdoor? You know, think about that for a little bit. Or think about how in the world are these companies operating there without making some kind of a compromise with the Chinese government? So that's something important to keep in mind. Because, you know, everyone always wants to make it sound, oh, you know, the VPN's magic. No, it's not. I'm sure that the VPNs, as part of a contractual agreement with the Chinese government, probably have to give over a list of the subscribers that they have in their payment information or something similar, so that way the Chinese government knows who needs to be put on a watch list inside of China, considering that they are now circumventing the Great Firewall. Something similar to that. Once again, I have to remind everyone, it's also a crime in China to actually have a VPN at this moment. And they also have the ability to shut them off as well. Y'all may not know that either, but during the Chinese victory parades that they have in Beijing annually, interestingly enough, all the VPN services shut down during that time, which also shows that the Chinese government has a lot more control over the VPNs operating inside of the People's Republic of China than a lot of people want to lead you into thinking. But with that, we're going to be moving on from that and into our next bit of news about the info on this fleet, and we got a little bit of additional information here. It was 11 Russian and Chinese ships, blah, 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 so on and so forth. And I believe these are actually some pictures. I don't know if these pictures were taken near the Aleutian Islands. I'm assuming that they were not. But these are some pictures that were alleged to be similar classes of ships used by the People's Liberation Army Navy, or the People's Liberation... Yeah, it is the People's Liberation Army Navy. I don't know why I thought it was spelling out P-L-A-A-N there, but it's P-L-A-N, the plan. But we can see some of the ships that the People's Liberation Army Navy most likely used in this flotilla today that reached near the Aleutian Islands. And I would have to say that this is certainly an escalatory measure, but we're going to leave what y'all think about it up to y'all. We're probably going to be running a poll on that here in a moment, allowing all of y'all to vote on what y'all think that was about and what our response may be to that, or what our response should be to that. With that, we're now going to be hopping all the way from the North Pacific and back into Ukraine and moving on into the location unknown news. And we had a small amount of it today, and most of it was actually really neat because Air Force Day was today inside of Ukraine, celebrating the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. But before we get into that, we, of course, have to talk about this fundraiser. It has reached $2.8 thousand so far.
What?
2.8. Pretty high amount. Yahoo! And we have to talk about the folks who have made that possible tonight, which is each and every single one of y'all who have been here with us at this moment. And so, Matthew, take it away.
All right, and it wouldn't be possible tonight without all of the donors up to this point. We're almost at 3,000. We're getting close to goal. We'll have about 2,000 to go once we reach that point. Simple math. I can do that. But anyways, moving on to our top donors of the night. The biggest one thus far is from D. Shaw, who put in a $250 donation. Then we have a $200 from DCC Prime 1. And thank you both very much for the largest donations of the night. Hey! We also have a $100 from Trister 1, some guy called the Enforcer. We have one from Hal Rose, BC Skyman, Kim Mwen. Then we have one from Bobby Ibarra and Snow White. And we also have a 54 from Paramecium. We have one from Greg Carrier, Destin Doge, Darren Neller, Plant Lady, Peter, M288, Enforcer for President, Mike Smith, Igor the Arsonist, Charles Hazlitt, and also Dad Good. And those are all of the top donations for the moment. And also big thanks to the smaller donors as well, because of course, without those, we would not be at the figure that we're at currently. So big thanks to you all. And of course, a big ol'.
And I've got to thank each and every one of y'all so much, including the folks that we weren't able to call out, for helping out this fundraiser tonight. We are at $2.8 thousand. We are just around $2.2 thousand away from the $5,000 goal tonight. And I've got to thank every single one of y'all so much once again for helping out these fundraisers, because this is really what the channel is for, is to actually help out the people we cover the news on in Ukraine. And every single Sunday, the Lee Spring Army comes together to be able to blow this thing out of the water and get it up towards the goal every single time. While we haven't reached the goal yet, we're only at $2.8 thousand. The Lee Spring Army has never missed a goal in its history. Ever. And honestly, that's really impressive when you think about it. And usually we even blow past the goal by like a factor of 2. We almost get up to like 10,000 sometimes, which is absolutely incredible. And so, I hope that as the stream continues on tonight, we are able to pass that $5,000 goal, and I know that we will. The Lee Spring Army has never missed a goal, and if we have to call out a general order to get it over the $5,000 goal, then that will be what we do. And we'll make sure to continue to help out the folks in Ukraine that deserve the support the most through Doctors Without Borders, which is an amazing nonprofit that has been over there operating in this war since day one. And so with that, thank you to everyone so much once again for supporting this fundraiser. And with that, let's get on into what folks have been saying tonight.
All right, so hopping right into our first poll of the night, it says a large flotilla of Russian and Chinese warships came close to Alaska and the U.S. responded. And what are your thoughts? 46% said it's a warning to the U.S. 27% said it's a fishing expedition. 21% said it's a routine patrol, nothing new. And 7% said unsure. And I doubt they're fishing with large guns like that. They are definitely not looking for fish or lobster or crab or anything like that. They are on the hunt for trouble, and they might find it if they keep on screwing around. Like the old graph says, you keep on effing around, sometimes you'll find out. The odds go up. But I would say it's most likely, seriously speaking, a warning to the U.S. It's honestly, to be fair, nothing different than what we do with our freedom of navigation missions through the Taiwan Strait or whatever that little body of water is through China and Taiwan. So it's honestly kind of a tit-for-tat situation. But once again, it's not good to see such a large amount of Chinese and Russian enemy ships so close to our land. So obviously we have to be vigilant, but at the moment, it's not that big of a deal to me. But Enforcer, what say you?
It's not that big of a deal. However, and I always have to remind everyone of this, international diplomacy is not supposed to be fair, and a lot of people are always under the misconception of that. I don't know why people always act like it's supposed to be fair. Like, well, if the United States is able to go on intervention missions around the world, then we should let the Russians do that. Why would we want to do that? That's like a monopoly saying, well, if I buy a property, then the other player also has to buy a property at the same time of his choosing. Then they're just going to buy a boardwalk every single time. You lose the game. The international diplomacy is not supposed to be fair. That's the number one rule of it. We may do freedom of navigation missions, like Matthew said, through the Strait of Taiwan, But when we do it, we are proving a point. When the Chinese do what they're doing with the Russians near the Aleutian Islands, they too are also trying to prove a point. The thing is, however, is that every side is trying to stop the other from proving their point or trying to send a message or escalate. And I would say that the fact that they went out of their way to sail their ships out of Vladivostok and Chinese ports along the east coast all the way up towards the Aleutian Islands is certainly trying to send a message. Navies like theirs usually don't travel that north. There's really nothing up there even, rather than the United States' territorial waters and getting close to it. And so I would say that that is certainly trying to send a message to the United States, but I don't think it's any message we should listen to, and I think that we may want to respond in kind by sending more freedom of navigation missions through the Taiwan Strait to send a message that we don't really bow to that kind of stuff, and we're going to do what we want. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. We just reached $3,000! Let's go! Eagle!
LSA.
Onwards to 5,000. We're only $2,000 away now from 5,000. And you know what? You know what, Matthew? The spirit of the Lee Spring Army calls. You know, it's that time of the night.
You're calling an emergency order?
An emergency order? What the hell do you think this is, FEMA? No, we're calling a general order up in here. What the hell? We are calling...
Call it then. Call it.
Call it then. Put it in reverse, Terry. But anyways, we are calling up general order number 22. If you have $5 to put into this fundraiser, put it in right now. And hopefully with all of the general order supports coming in, the donations coming in, we will be able to pass $5,000 raised for Doctors Without Borders. So I'm going to be putting in 20 because you got to lead by example. And so really quickly, let me go throw in my 20. In 1 second, everyone. Hopefully it'll be popping up soon. But general order number 22 is in effect. If you have $5 to give, or more for that matter, throw it in right now so that way we can get this fundraiser above the $5,000 mark. If all of us band together, like the Lee Spring Army always has, we will be able to do this with relative ease, and we'll be able to blow over the 5,000 mark, and everyone will see that the Lee Spring Army always backs up its word and always makes sure to support Ukraine and the folks over there. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well while the general order comes rolling in like a wave. And with that, we are going to be moving on into the next poll.
All right, and moving into our second poll, it says Ukraine struck the Chanhar Bridge and others today, and will Ukraine succeed in cutting off Crimea? And I did make a small assumption there that Ukraine is trying to cut off Crimea, and that certainly appears, in my opinion, to be what they're trying to do. And it looks like 86% said yes, it's only a matter of time. 6% said possibly, but likely not. 5% said unsure, and 3% said no, that's mostly unrealistic. And I think with the weapons that Ukraine has been provided, it is completely realistic to try to cut off Crimea, mainly in the logistical sense. But of course, people can still get across because there is a land connection. But logistically speaking, they can cut it off for the most part if they keep hitting these bridges and it totally knock them out. Thus far, it looks like they've damaged them severely, but not completely wrecked them, which it's going to take a little bit more work. But Enforcer, what say you?
And can you reread that poll prompt?
It says, Ukraine struck the Chanhar Bridge and others today, and will Ukraine succeed in cutting off Crimea?
I believe they largely are succeeding in cutting off Crimea. It's kind of a continuous thing because the Russians rebuild the bridges and then they have to be hit again. But I certainly think that they are treading Crimea, which means that they're losing supplies, incredibly well. There's really not an efficient way to get supplies in Crimea anymore due to these continuous attacks on the bridges. And so I would have to say I think these are certainly starting to whittle down the effectiveness of the forces in Crimea and also the Russian Air Forces and Navy's abilities that are based inside of Crimea as well. And so, with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And to inspire the Lee Spring Army, the general order so far has already raised another $800 for Doctors Without Borders. And so we are only $1.2 thousand away from the fundraiser goal. Only 1.2. I don't know if the general order is fizzing out. It doesn't look like it at the moment. And hopefully, the general order will continue to power on forward to 5,000. Dang, Al Rose and Yurchenko. Hey, that just got us up to 4.2. We are only $800 away.
Nice.
And hopefully we can make it up to 5K here in just like a minute or two. But with that, I hope we addressed that one fairly well. And we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next poll says, data shows that many NATO countries are spending under goal or under target on military, and what does this indicate? 49% said that they aren't taking the situation seriously. 26% said they want the West to pay instead. 15% said, they're doing their best. And 10% said unsure. And we're going to examine just the facts in this scenario, not the politics, because you can delve into that. We're going to leave that to the side because we can't cover that on the stream. I would say that the system that they've agreed to, all the NATO countries, is fair. 2% is the target that they're supposed to reach, and it's based on your GDP. So if your country makes less in GDP, you pay less for the 2%, and if you make more, the 2% is obviously much higher. To see countries like Germany only paying 1.5% and some paying even less than that, like 1%, which is basically in breach of the agreement they've reached with NATO, that to me is very disappointing and kind of pathetic because 2% of the money they're making in GDP, if other countries can swing it, then they can swing it. Poland is clearly stepping up and doing it themselves, and they're spending way over the target. So these other countries, in my opinion, are kind of freeloading to an extent. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that, in my opinion, the 2% agreement per GDP percentage was to make sure that everything was fair in NATO. And I think that it's not only unfair that a decent amount of countries are spending well below that mark. I also think that it's a detriment to the NATO alliance and its strength that every NATO member isn't doing their part. One has to remember that, everyone in a team has to do their part. A race car team doesn't win just because the driver's great. He wins because his pit crew is great. The football team doesn't win their game because the quarterback is great. They win because everyone on the team is doing their part and pulling their weight. And a nation doesn't win because there is one great president. There are millions of great citizens following that leader, that president, into that war that help that war to be successful and help them to win. And alliances are the same. Every member of the team has to do their part, and every member of the team has to pull their weight to make sure that the whole team wins. NATO is a giant team, and we're only seeing that a few countries, according to this little chart here, which of course isn't talking about every NATO country, it's only talking about some of the larger ones, and then Slovenia got thrown in for some reason, although they're a little smaller NATO member. There are very few countries that are over the target goal. And I think that it's important to remind many of these countries that if we continue to spend below our target goals, that only makes the NATO alliance look like a target to people like the Russians. If, for anything, everyone should be spending over the 2% GDP goal just to make NATO look like it's not someone that could be pushed around. Everyone in NATO is doing their part, everyone is pulling their weight, and therefore NATO appears strong to the world. NATO is strong to the world right now. Don't get me wrong. Just because these countries are spending below the GDP target doesn't mean that they're weak. France has a very good military. The British have a great military, and they're also spending above target goal. The Germans have a pretty decent military, but they could be better. They could be larger. They could be more
Hey, we
honest.
hit gold!
Hey, we just hit $5,000! Hey! And
Jaga jaga!
Igor! And I gotta
Let's
say,
go!
absolutely incredible. We've hit the goal before the first hour was even out, actually. We had 1 minute left before the next hour came in, and we just reached $5,000. Absolutely amazing. And I gotta thank everyone in the Lee Spring Army for doing y'all's part and helping out this fundraiser. Just like every member of the team has to pull their weight, every single member in the Lee Spring Army has always helped out with these fundraisers. Whether y'all are here clicking the like button or whether y'all support this fundraiser with y'all's dollars, y'all have all helped out in a big way tonight in making sure that another $5,000 makes its way to Doctors Without Borders and continues to help the people in Ukraine that we're talking about right now. And I got to thank all of y'all so much once again, because through y'all support to these fundraisers, y'all ensure that the fire burns inside of the Lee Spring Army, so that way the phrase, "Long live the Lee Spring Army," and "the Lee Spring Army never dies," will continue to burn on in the history and the space of the internet, and make sure to remind everyone that support for Ukraine is still as strong as it ever has been. And so thank you to everyone so much once again for helping out this fundraiser tonight. And I hope that y'all continue to as well. Y'all can keep donating for really the next 2 hours or so before the fundraiser rounds out. But absolutely amazing. And I got to thank the LSA so much once again for reaching the fundraiser goal tonight. It wouldn't have been possible without every single one of y'all, whether it was a $1 donation, a $5 donation, a $500 donation, it wouldn't have been possible. And so thank you to every single one of y'all so much once again. And with that, we now get back to this. And so, after going through that great little speech for the LSA, which is the best community on YouTube, I think that everyone should be reaching the 2% target because that's what everyone agreed on when joining the NATO alliance. And a lot of these countries that are below the goal were some of the first members of the NATO alliance, like France. Well, actually, France wasn't a member of the NATO alliance until a little while later. But Germany, Canada, and Turkey were key members of the NATO alliance when it was first founded. And so it doesn't really make a lot of sense for them to be shooting way below the goal when they were mostly the reason why NATO even exists in the first place. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and with that being said, we are fresh out of polls. So we're moving on from our polls to our live chat questions. And up first, we had the Morse code decoders of the stream. Tonight, it was Mark Hodges, Cliff Simonson, Earl Bernew, and Paul Schultz. They said the Morse code cipher says, they say don't burn your bridges. So Ukraine didn't, and they burned Russia's. Long live the LSA.
And that's the sound of money, and y'all are right on the mark. That is the Morse code message of the night, and I have to say, the Ukrainians do a really good job at burning bridges, just not theirs. They build bridges with the rest of the world, but they burn the Russian ones. And so I hope that does address that fairly well. Thank y'all for deciphering that Morse code message tonight. That's an incredible skill that y'all have. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and also, by the way, if you have a live chat question for us, please tag at Enforcer Matt in the chat, so that way I can add it to the spreadsheet, because right now we have 10. I could use a little bit more. But with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into our second live chat question, which goes to Mad Machine, who says, do you believe that it's only a matter of time before the orcs will have to retreat from Crimea due to lack of food and other vital resources?
I would say, and really quickly, let me make sure to save something here so we can address it in a second. But can you reread that one again, Matthew?
It says, do you believe that's only a matter of time before the orcs will have to retreat from Crimea due to lack of food and other vital resources?
I think they won't really have to retreat due to a lack of food, because food actually doesn't take up that much space and weight, transportation wise. It's actually one of the smaller, I guess you could say, cargo categories in terms of weight and volume. They will most likely have to retreat most of their forces from the area due to a lack of ammunition, which is far heavier and takes up far more volume and space to be able to transport. So I think that we'll probably see a scale back or a reduction of the use of Russian armed forces, for example, the Air Force and the Navy in Crimea, and they may have to start operating from mainland Russia, or they may have to leave the peninsula entirely. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And also, I actually saw, Matthew, that you banned that person that I was about to address there. But I think this is something fairly interesting to address nonetheless. So I'm going to take a minute really quickly to address this. Somebody said, and we know where they're from, and we know why they asked it, but we're going to address this nonetheless because it's a interesting question and one that makes no sense when you've been around this channel forever and you know how it works. They said, you say the money goes to Doctors Without Borders in Ukraine. Can you show us how and when it is used in Ukraine? I can't. You see, the thing is that unlike people like James Vasquez who ask for money directly and then scam everyone for millions, we run our fundraisers through YouTube. So YouTube's actually the one who does all of the accounting and actual managing of the money. We don't touch a cent of anything that goes into these fundraisers. And I honestly think that's the best way to run it because it really gets rid of the sketchy, sweaty scammers out there who love to get their hands on the money so that way they can mess with it, and all of that's on YouTube's end. So YouTube's the one who's responsible for it, and also they run it through 5013C nonprofits, which means that they are legally obligated to report the numbers of the money that they receive and also how they use it, instead of going to Joe Blow or, badass super dude in Lviv who's racking up a bill at the Grand Hotel for thousands of dollars for Jack Daniels. We avoid that entirely. And also YouTube is legally responsible for that, considering that they're raising it for nonprofits. And so then they also have to file the proper paperwork with the US government saying how much was given to nonprofits through YouTube, how much was raised. And if they didn't do that, or if they misaccounted it, they could be sued for hundreds of millions of dollars, which is a very good deterrent to make sure that they don't conduct scams like other people do. That's why we run ours through YouTube Give. And that's also why we are greatly limited on the kinds of fundraisers that we can run, because YouTube is very strict about the kind that you can run. They can't be supporting guns or bullets. The nonprofit actually has to have a running history and record instead of just popping up overnight like a lot of the scammers do. And it's a great way to run the nonprofit. And that's something that we've always been hearing and getting pushback on, well, not really pushback on, but, people have always wanted to try and bring up is, why in the world do we run our fundraisers this way? That's because I don't want people to come in here and have to ask, are these people scammers or not? That's completely out of the question, because you're really asking the question when you come onto these fundraisers, do you trust a multi-billion-dollar company like YouTube to not break the law and then get sued for hundreds of millions of dollars? And most people would say, I don't think they're going to do that, because they haven't. And they've been running this YouTube Give system for several years, and the accounting is there. If you wanted, you could go get an attorney and request from YouTube the accounting, because then they'll have it. And so that's
And
why
also, by the way, I saw someone say, what is YouTube's cut on the fundraiser? And they don't take a cut whatsoever. 100% of the money goes to Ukraine, not to Ukraine, but to the charity that eventually disperses the money and uses it in Ukraine. And also, not only does YouTube not take a cut, they also cover the credit card transaction fees and anything that could possibly be an expense that would come out of the money. So YouTube is very upfront and very transparent about it. And that's what the enforcer just explained.
Yeah, and you can actually see that all. I don't know if people read much, but you can actually see that all if you're on desktop to the bottom right of the stream itself. YouTube has a little window down there that explains the fundraiser and also says that they cover all transaction fees and do not take a cut of anything else. You can also just type it in and just type in YouTube Give, and Google has an entire page about YouTube Give, because YouTube's owned by Google, and they explain how the system works as well. So there's really not a lot of questions that can be asked. And also, if you ever had any questions about, does this money really get to Ukraine? You would kind of have to ask YouTube, and their answer is automatically, yeah, otherwise we would get sued for fraud. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the final question in this segment, and then we're going to be moving back into the news.
And this one goes to Margaret Hemsley, who says, was there any resolution from the peace talks in Saudi Arabia? And no, there hasn't been. And also, there were probably nothing really coming out of it from what I've heard. It sounds like it's really going nowhere, but it was a good gesture. And of course, the U.S. showed up, so Ukraine got to continue talking to the U.S. China showed up. I don't know if you want to talk to them, but they were there. But nothing major. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that it's not really going to result in anything. The Russians aren't even there, so how in the world can you have peace talks without one of the warring parties involved? So it's not really going anywhere. It was really just a PR stunt for the Saudis, and also a chance for them to get to talk to the Chinese as well, since they're in attendance. So that's really all it was, and we haven't seen anything come out of it yet. No one's even really talked about it much. It's just kind of happening in the background. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And also, someone just said, wait a minute, so this channel raises about $20,000 a month for charities? More than that, usually. This fundraiser it seems to be a slow burner as far as they go. Usually, our fundraisers get up close to $10,000. So usually, it's closer to like $40,000 to $30,000 a month is being sent to charities and nonprofits, which is a huge bragging right for us, and really the only thing that we're incredibly proud of on this channel to a very high degree is how much we've been able to help out nonprofits in continuing their works and efforts inside of Ukraine. And it wouldn't have been possible without YouTube Give. It's an amazing nonprofit system, and if I was to say anything, I personally would not donate to fundraisers that are not run through YouTube Give. And I know that, people trust fundraisers, or people are about to start throwing in random fundraisers. But Enforcer, such and such fundraiser, I trust. Yeah, you can trust them. But the thing is that if they are not legally obligated, like YouTube is, and then the nonprofits they give to actually account for the money, you can't really ensure that it's going anywhere. And that's something that for some reason no one really wraps their head around much whenever we say this, and nobody believes us until someone like James Vasquez is uncovered, and then they go, oh my God, I can't believe it, and then everyone just forgets about it. But if there is no actual contractual paperwork like a 501(c) nonprofit has to fill out, they're not really obligated even legally to do anything with your money rather than pocket it. It's kind of like the GoFundMe scams, where someone runs a GoFundMe for the homeless guy that went viral on TikTok, and they're not even related to the homeless guy, and they just abscond with $500,000, and no one can really do anything about it. That's kind of the same thing. So that's why we always encourage to, of course, support nonprofits through things that are largely legally insured, because if they, abscond with the funds or anything, you can sue them and they can get in a lot of trouble for it. And that's why we run things through YouTube Give. That's why we don't support Johnny's drone fundraiser, because Johnny may be taking that $20,000 we raise and going to Cancun with it. we don't know, and there's really no way to back it up with any kind of paperwork or anything. So that's why we don't run nonprofits for folks that aren't 501 nonprofits, aren't in the YouTube Guide Star program, or in YouTube Give. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And this is always something that we see people coming in and wanting to try and create a problem about every single time we run a fundraiser. And, you know, we address it a little bit, and I always feel like we have to address it because it's just annoying to me that well, it's annoying to me because, you know, this is my big thing. This is what I consider to be the pride of the channel. And then folks want to run in because they hear some lies from people out there who are trying to cause trouble, and then want to come in and go, oh, well, I don't believe this thing is real. Well, then give your money to James Vasquez then and see what happens to it. I don't know. But with that, we are going to be moving on into the location unknowns. And starting off with our first bit, we saw that an Su-27 had its picture taken on Air Force Day with none other than President Volodymyr Zelensky. Right there. There he is. Pretty cool.
Look at that, right in the middle.
Look at that, right in the middle. I wonder why he's in the middle. But anyways, there is the Su-27. And absolutely amazing to see that they're having a little bit of an Air Force Day. Of course, I believe these aircraft are actually on the tarmac and ready to go. We can see this one actually has some missiles mounted onto its pylons. But really neat to see that they were celebrating Air Force Day today. But this isn't the only thing that was really interesting and really nice as a picture on Air Force Day. We also got to see an Su-24 on the tarmac that was carrying a Storm Shadow missile. We can see that this guy took a picture of himself, a selfie, and there's a Storm Shadow missile mounted onto the pylon of that Su-24 right there.
Wow.
Pretty cool to see, I gotta say. And what's even cooler is that on the other side of this Su-24, we didn't include this tonight due to time constraints, but there was a Scalp EG on the other pylon, and Zelensky actually signed that one. But sadly, I didn't include that. I just included the selfie, the Storm Shadow, on the other side of the missile. But with that, moving on from that, great to see that they're celebrating Air Force Day in Ukraine. And moving on into our casualty report, the casualty losses have been pretty decent.
They got 4.
Hey, 4. And what do we got here for the memes? Let's see here. 4 for Matt. Hey, for KJ.
4 happy days.
Mark, 4 for Matt. Hey, and we got Edward.
Oh.
It's a 4. Hey, Melissa Smith. 4 more from Matt. Hey, Douglas. Damn, son. 4 for Matt. Hey, and very nice to see. Hey, MC Flight. Maybe time for some new equipment. Easy financing. John Deere's offering it. Look at that. The memes are coming in. And 50 terrifying pics to show why the fear of deep water is real. Oh. But anyways, moving on from that weird thing that's just an ad, I guess. The losses have been pretty high for the Russians today in almost all categories. 590 Russian troops were liquidated over the past 24 hours. 11 armored personnel carriers were destroyed. 19 trucks were also burned. 5 tanks were also destroyed as well, along with 22 artillery pieces, 10 drones, an MLRS, and a cruise missile. All in all, a pretty impressive day. And of course, the 4 Bobcat skid steers. But the Ukrainians have been at work and have been trying to knock out as much Russian materials as they can, and it appears that they did a really good job today. And speaking of knocking out Russian materials, I think they need to add a massive statue to that casualty report, because the Ukrainian Trident was actually mounted onto the Mother Ukraine statue today, and they came out with some pictures of it, and while it's not complete, it does look pretty cool.
That does look pretty cool, I gotta say.
That's pretty neat. So they'll be putting the steel panels on behind it again here soon, and the statue will have been redone. At least the shield will have been redone. Instead of being the Motherland statue, it will now be the Mother Ukraine statue, and instead of having the sickle and hammer up here on the shield, it will have the Ukrainian Trident instead. Really neat to see, and I gotta say that's a nice upgrade for sure to that statue. We're now going to be moving on from Kyiv and on into the frontline news, because we've had a lot. And I'm not even kidding. It is a load. And so starting off in the Northeast, and I also have to let you all know that unfortunately today we didn't really see any major frontline advances. Deep State did update before we went live, and I checked. And so we won't really be going over deep frontline analysis today because there really isn't any. We'll only be going over the actions that the Ukrainians have committed on film and in picture evidence. And so with that, moving on into the area of Nuzha Dvanka, we saw that the 92nd Brigade had been hitting some Mista S's. And we can see the drone coming in on this Mista S right here. And we can see it once again going in on his final attack run, lining itself up for the Mista, and we can see the static starting to build up heavily as it gets closer and closer. And the static got pretty strong right there, but it did hit right onto the Mista S, setting it ablaze, and we'll probably see the ammunition explode here in a moment. Hopefully. One can hope. Oh, the fire is growing a little stronger, but sadly, we didn't see a massive explosion. Still, very nice to see that the 92nd Brigade was able to take care of one of those Mista S's, and of course destroying another pretty expensive and high-end artillery piece for the Russian army. Moving on from that and into our next clip from the area, we also saw other Russian forces in the nearby direction being hit by artillery from the 10th Brigade. And actually, this has now been updated to say that this was in Avdiivka. Although we have the 10th Brigade located in the northeast, we will be moving this marker down to Avdiivka and touching on that in a little bit, now that we have a new location for the 10th Brigade, apparently. Just in case some of y'all are wondering how we get the marker locations like that one. Back in the day, I actually found a map, and every once in a while I'll check on it to see where all of the brigades are on the front line. So I can largely cite off what brigades are in what areas at any given time, and usually they stay in those areas for an incredibly long amount of time. The last time we checked on the 10th Brigade, they were in the northeast, around the area of Kuzmivka, or all the way up towards Drovchino, somewhere in that general region. But it appears that according to that video, they are now moved to Avdiivka instead. So we're going to be moving that marker down there, and from here forward, we're going to be moving the 10th Brigade's videos towards the direction of Avdiivka. Moving on from the only clip that apparently came out of the northeastern area, we're now going to be moving on into Bakhmut. And we've gotten some pretty interesting video clips from here today, starting off with the one behind the lines near Pidorodne, where we saw that a unit called the Asgard was taking out some Russian equipment with their drones, and they were getting some pretty sweet stuff. When you see the first drone coming in on this tank, and hitting a T-90, it appears, flattening the turret and taking care of a $5 million tank. We now see another drone coming in and hitting that vehicle as well. And we can see the tank now smoldering and burning. And once again, I have to remind everyone, a $1,000 drone just destroyed a $3.5 million tank. And we can see it happening again.
That's a really good return on investment, I gotta say.
I gotta tell you, man, someone needs to call up those mindset, grindset people and tell them that this is a real return on an investment right here. And
Oh, I'm telling you, the Ukrainians might become finance bros when it's all over with. 90% ROI. I'm telling you.
Oh, man, I'm telling you. They're going to start doing videos, Matthew, where they're going, grind. I can tell you the only grind I'm on is stock grind. You know, something like that. But with that, we're going to be moving on from that low clipper. They're great to see that the Asgard unit was taking out a large amount of Russian equipment. And we also got a little bit of archival footage that is apparently new. It just came out today, but it was originally made sometime during the spring of this year. But we got to see some Ukrainian soldiers firing at Russians from their trench position near Bakhmut.
Вон, бежит пидор ебаный на купола. Сейчас я пройду, зарядиться надо.
Чип, помоги огнем от купола
Отходите.
первого, от купола первого. 50.
Гай, я Юджин, смотри, с РПГ работаю.
Давай, Юджин. Смотри, сейчас пуха сбросит гранату. Они бегают, блядь. Есть! Красавчик,
And now I hear him firing the RPG. We can also hear another Ukrainian on the radio.
Давай, я беру, еще двое в дыму.
Сука, не долетела.
Они побежали ближе к куполу.
We now see him reloading.
Сука, не спеши, он все равно остановится, блядь. Ай, я чип,
После, отходи.
Чип, ай,
Уши!
на чипе посылка, легкий.
We now hear him firing again. And he's now going to go and reload the RPG once more.
Долетай, родной! Давай, бля! Попал, сука, пидорас ебаный! Я во второго попал! Попал, ебать его, урод! Давай еще один осколок, есть?
Южа, на попадание в танчик, кого?
Где-то автомат туда не, бля, да, там мне автомат. Дайте автомат. Фу! Дай магазин один магазин дай мне прицел.
50 метров, от первого купола.
We now see him picking up a AK. It appears to be an AK-74.
Сядь, не стой. Тогда нормально, блядь.
We now hear some small amount of rifle fire.
Сука, ты меня принял?
We now hear this guy laying down the fire.
Метров, ну, вижу. Один пидор перед куполом, метрах 20, пацаны. Надо его завалить. Купол. Если ты
We
меня
now see him
слышишь,
getting the
кинь
next
гранату,
RPG
кинь
round
гранату
ready, I
вперед.
believe. We can't really see it too well, but I think he's working on it.
Ебать. Вот это попал, блядь, прям в дебила, блядь.
Купол.
Сука,
Купол,
пидорасы
надо взять.
ебаные.
Если слышишь, кинь гранату, метров 20 вперед.
We now see him loading the RPG.
Не знаю. 500. Пацаны, сейчас будет пострел.
Купол, давай на связь.
Пострел!
We now hear him firing.
Пламя, надо, чтобы...
And that's the end of the clip. But a little bit of older footage from spring of 2023 of some of the action happening around Bakhmut. Moving well behind the lines, we also saw that Russian forces had been hit pretty heavily by the 56th Motorized Rifle Brigade in Hikharivka. And here's the clip. When you see them dangling the drone bomblet above the trail, it appears to be a well-traveled trail by Russian forces, and now they're lying in wait for the first unfortunate Russian that'll be hit. We now see them dropping the bomblet, and it appears that something went nuclear. I don't know what they hit. I didn't even see it, but it went nuclear. No doubt about that.
Oh, the Russians are becoming trailblazers, блядь.
That's it. Me for 20 blaze it, blade, but not with the weed. We're blazing it with the landmines, blade. We can now see them getting another grenade ready to drop in the area. I don't know what the hell they're hitting. Yeah, I don't know if those are the bomblets or what they're hitting, but whatever it is, this thing is blowing up. Boom, jaga, bled. And we now see another explosion out there in the distance, and that's the end of the clip. I have no idea what the hell they were hitting or what those bomblets were made of, but the explosions were huge. And so we're now going to be moving on into the southern flank near Klishkivka, where we saw that the Ukrainians had collected some trophies. Check it out. Loads of ATGMs, loads of RPGs, an ATGM tripod even. Quite the collection, I gotta say. I'm kind of envious. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from that low clip and towards the front lines near Klishkivka, where we saw the Ukrainians conducting an assault on Russian positions. We now see them looking into the distance. We can hear the faint sounds of firefights, but we don't really know where they are. And we now see the Ukrainians firing into the tree line to their right and moving down this little trail. We now see them continuing to fire into the tree line. You hear the sounds of firefights in front of them. We see the soldier aiming into the tree line again and taking some shots. It appears that he's just firing.
Power line?
I think it might be.
Yeah, that would suck.
And that's the end of the clip, but a small glimpse at a part of the 3rd Brigade still conducting fighting in that area as they continue to push forward beyond Klishkivka. With that, we also saw the 3rd Brigade firing mortars in support of those infantry later on in the day. When you see them whipping out the 60mm mortar and firing it. They actually have a little battery of them here. Oh, they didn't hang that one right down there, but it still fired. These are the firework mortars, see? they're smaller. These are the 60mm infantry mortars, by the way. They are made to be lighter, smaller, easier to transport, and also the rounds that they fire don't have as much high explosive in them, but nevertheless they are a very vital part and a backbone of infantry support in the field. And so with that, we're going to be moving on from all of the news that we've gotten from the Bachman area, great to see, and we're now going to be moving on towards the direction of Torrents, where we saw a Ukrainian crew firing one of their SPGs.
Готов.
See him looking down to the turret as they load the gun. No auto-loaders here. This is that old Soviet stuff. Look, an old Soviet SPG.
Готовий.
You now see him firing.
Wow.
Oh my. And that's the end of that little clip there, but really neat to see them firing that little 2S1 Gutsivka. And so with that, we're going to be moving on from that area of the front line and down towards Avdiivka, where we saw the 10th Separate Mountain Brigade hitting Russian forces with artillery in this area. We hear the Game of Thrones intro. Very neat. And we're going to mute that, because now they're playing
Man,
some...
the corporate music started.
they're playing some Ed Sheeran here. And we see the Russians here with a AGS-17 grenade launcher. And that appears to have been the lucky target of the day. As it's now
Well, they're
been...
playing corporate music over this attack.
Maybe not.
Oh, wow.
Maybe not corporate. And now we can see them highlighting their next target, which is a VK. I don't really know what the VK stands for, but we're about to see him hit it anyways. We can see an explosion over there to the left side, actually, and we can see little pops of ammo flying out of that explosion. We can see the ammo continuing to burn. What's weird, though, is that the explosion was over here, but the ammo fire is over there. And we can see it continuing to burn. It appears to have caught the grass on fire as well. And we can see that it's a KAMAZ. It was a KAMAZ supply truck that caught on fire over there. We now see that they're highlighting a Mista B. It's right there, right where the mouse cursor is. And they're about to start hitting that. And it appears that they hit it spot on first time. But we can see a little red crosshair highlighting this area over here. So I don't know what that's highlighting. I didn't see the Mista B over there. I think there's actually another gun over here. It looks like there's maybe one right there where that crosshair is. But I can't really tell for certain. And so with that, that's the end of that little video right there. But great to see the 10th Mountain Brigade hitting some Russian forces and ammunition in the area of Avdiivka. Moving on down towards the direction of Marinka, we also got a couple of video clips from here as well. For example, a Russian tank running over a mine in the middle of Marinka. It was a sight to behold. Check it out. There's the tank. It's going to start rolling forward a little. And we see it run over the mine, blowing out both ends like Taco Bell. And we can now see the tank come to a complete stop immediately. And the crew is about to start bailing out if they even can. And we can see that they are bailing out, smoke billowing out of the hatches behind them. And they're now making a run for it as the tank is going to catch on fire and blow up later.
Oh, wow, those Russians are smoking.
Man, smoking kills, man. But with that, that's the end
He
of
got a whole pack.
Man, call him Tupac, because that guy is smoking. But anyways, moving on from that, we're now going to be moving on into another little bit of news here, where we saw that they got some patches of the 150's motorized rifle division that was captured by the Ukrainian forces at Marinka. And I gotta say, those patches with the little skull on them look very similar to other patches that would have been worn by the Waffen SS during the Second World War, but what do I know? I don't know anything. It's not like I went to 4 years of college to learn this kind of simple information, but it's still very similar in terms of appearance. We're going to be moving on from Marinka and on into the southern front, because the fun doesn't end in Donetsk. No. It actually goes on all the way into the southern front, and hell, even on down to Crimea and also Novokakhovka as well. So starting off with our first clip in Velika Novosilka, we saw some medevac mastiffs. They were pretty neat. Check them out. There they are. I mean, they're pretty high end.
That's pretty nice, actually.
Pretty luxurious. Man, this is about as luxurious as the Grand Hotel in Lviv that James Vasquez stayed in. And so with that, we're going to be moving on from that little bit of news and towards Staromanivka, where we saw that some fleeing Russians were targeted. And we hear Tokyo Drift playing from Fast and Furious. I don't know why. Anyways, we can see the Russians running for their lives, and we now see the RPG come down on them. Unfortunate. And look at that, here they come again. Oh, bleh, that's not good for him. It looks like the weather today for that man was cloudy skies with a chance of shrapnel. We're now going to be moving on from that and further down the lines towards Wheelipol, where we also saw the Ukrainians riding through a field of sunflowers, and as they ran over the sunflowers, they ended up knocking the petals off of them, so their BMP got covered in yellow sunflower petals. You can see that right here. We can see them continuing to race through the sunflower field, knocking off the sunflower petals, and giving it a nice yellow color. It is certainly going to blend in with the sunflowers, there's no doubt about that. So with that, we're going to be moving on from that little interesting video and down towards the village of Zakhirne, where we saw that apparently a Russian war crime, or an attempted war crime, went wrong. This is the translation. A tragic state of emergency occurred at the front in the Zaporizhia region, the Russian military covered there. The incident took place near Robotino, which is Robotne, so we put it in the general area. Two sources in the general staff told us, a group of our military men changed into Ukrainian uniforms, which is a war crime, and wanted to go behind enemy lines in order to make a stir there, quote unquote. This group was recorded from our own UAV. They were mistaken for the armed forces of Ukraine, and the Russians ordered an artillery strike on them. Due to this inconsistency in actions, 32 of them were killed by friendly fire. So the Russians called an artillery barrage on the poser Russians that were looking like Ukrainians and ended up killing 32 of them. The troubles
that's some karma.
But the karma continues. The troubles did not end there. After the impact, the enemy revealed the positions of our artillery and covered it with cluster shells. Another 19 people died there, and many are wounded, including seriously.
Damn.
The culprit of the
this makes you want to sing that song, that Karma Chameleon song. You know, Karma Chameleon.
Man, I'm telling you, it makes me want to sing all kinds of songs, but I can't sing, so we'll just avoid that. The culprit of the tragedy was the commander, who forced the military to change into Ukrainian uniforms and did not say anything to anyone about it. Immediately after the artillery hit his own soldiers, he realized what he had done and deserted from his position. They're now searching for him. And so this guy ended up getting about 50-something people killed from his own stupidity. I gotta say, I gotta thank that Russian officer for helping the Ukrainians to continue their war efforts, and the Ukrainians really didn't even have to fire many shots to take out all of these guys. The Russians took out most of them themselves, and then the Ukrainians came in and mopped up the artillery that took out the Russian forces that were posing as Ukrainians. Gotta say, I love to see this kind of stuff, and hopefully the Russians continue to do stupid actions like these, so the Ukrainians can get a little leg up each and every time stupidity like this unfolds. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from that little bit of news and on into Robotne itself, where we saw some Chechens in the area. Apparently, the Chechens have been moved here. And I'm not talking about the Ukrainian Chechens, I'm talking about the Kadyrovite Chechens. I'm assuming that this music is not copyright. Oh man, he's got a little cut on finger, bitches!
Въезжаем мы в населенный пункт Работино, который сейчас
является одной из самых главных, лакомых.
Man, they're playing the action hunting music in the movies.
Yeah, seriously.
And this guy here wearing the damn monocle. Yes, quite dark out. Let me just use my one eyeball. Yes.
Первая линия обороны, которую противник никак не может прорвать, постоянно пытается. Въезжаем мы уже в темное время суток ночью. Потому что в этот период
We now see the inside of the armored car as the epic safari music continues in the background.
И едем мы на минимальном свете. Ускоряемся на открытых участках. Тем не менее, несмотря на то, что вечером относительно безопасно, с нами в кузове едет командир группы БПЛА, который постоянно в прибор ночного видения мониторит небо, и в случае чего обнаружение птичек сразу же открывается огонь.
This guy's words are very interesting. I have no idea what he's saying.
Ночью передвигаешься ты только с ним.
Да, я вообще на позиции передвигаюсь ночью. Ты знаешь, Влад, как эта штука быстро дрон выявляет?
I like how this guy is supposed to be using this night vision device, yet they're lighting his face up with a flashlight, meaning that the
Yeah.
night vision device probably isn't even on right now.
Man, he'd be blinded if he had the thing on.
Что вчера выезжали тоже в это же время. И обкладывали вас, да?
Look,
Look at
wait,
him
hang
look up
on.
at the sky.
Yeah, that thing is certainly off, man, because he just looked at the light. Like, you know, someone was probably about to say, "Oh, you have to shine it into the thing." No, he just looked at the light right there, and he's not blinded by it. Yeah, come on. This thing isn't even on. It's not even working.
И обкладывали вас, да?
Man, he's probably watching Netflix in that thing.
Пытались поймать нас, хахлы.
Dude, he's
Watching a
probably...
refresher video on how to be a soldier.
Dude, he's probably trying to Twitter Romania up in that thing and take a look at what's going on there.
Бывало, и поэтому нас не просто так поймать.
I'm going to be turning that down because it's just music. It's just action music. So we can see them hanging out in an outpost here. We can also see that they have the remote control for the industrial cranes that you find in places like, a warehouse for some reason in this outpost. I don't know why. Now you see them chit-chatting a little. Uh-oh, the Punisher skull. We know this guy means business.
This guy's a joke right here. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah, he is. He's certainly a joke. Apparently. Oh, wait a minute. Baba Yaga. It says it right there. It says Baba Yaga.
What does it say about it?
It says, post. Oh, let's see.
The man's girlfriend, Baba Yaga, was calling and emailing, "Please come back home. I want to see."
So it's something about the Baba Yaga drone. But I don't.
Oh, it's a drone.
Yeah, it's the drone Baba Yaga. You know, like we were talking about a while ago. But I can't really read the rest of this thing, unfortunately. But I can get that out of it. Baba Yaga drone, and that's it. The rest of it, unfortunately, I don't really know Russian or Ukrainian well enough to really be able to read any of that.
I guess this Russian never plans on having to put on a gas mask or anything.
No, he doesn't. Dude, his gas mask is his beard. He just puts that thing up in front of his mouth, and it's like a filter.
Yeah.
And someone said the dude is all neck beard. Yeah, I know. That's the weird thing. He doesn't believe in a goatee or a mustache or anything. It's just all neck beard. I'm not really a big fan.
Might be about time to shave instead of trying to look like a hard ass.
Let's see here. Apparently he's talking about Baba Yaga right now. I'm supposing. Dude, Baba Yaga, the drone, has stricken fear in these people, man. Like, they are scared of that thing. Blitz! Baba Yaga gets carpet bombed by some drone. Let's see here.
Close up of that mouth. What the hell?
And you're getting a close up of that mouth like it's a thing of beauty. And I gotta tell you, that's the opposite of whatever the hell beauty is.
Ugly.
Man, you're ugly.
Man, let me put it right out there.
I was trying to be a little subtle with it. You just came out with it. You're like, ugly. We see him continuing to talk about the drone. And apparently they just went to this bunker and then they hang out there and then they don't go anywhere else in the video. And with that, that's the end of the clip. Now they just look at the moon For some reason, that's almost as bright as the sun. But nevertheless, that's the end of that clip, and you see the Chechens are, of course, scared of Baba Yaga. Nevertheless, we also got an interesting video today of a Leopard 2A6 on the move, but I have to correct the caption because this doesn't make any sense. And I'll read you all the caption. Source: a retreating Leopard 2A6 from one of the Ukrainian mechanized companies that was defeated near the settlement of Novodonalivka, morning of June 8th in Zaporizhia. What's interesting about that, though, is that this video came out today, so it's not June 8th. This is actually somewhere around today. And also, another thing is that Ukrainian lines aren't even near Novodonalivka. They're all the way down at Robotny. So I don't even know how a unit would be defeated where there isn't even a front line right now. But anyways, here's the clip. We can see a Bradley here, standing by on the side of the road. Oh, and this guy's got an M16A2 right there, really cool. And there goes the Leopard 2.
That's pretty sick.
Yeah, that was pretty cool, wasn't it? And with that,
Man, they just had one.
they only had the one in that video, but it was still cool nonetheless, and really neat to see. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from that clip, and on down the line towards Dolinka, where we saw that the 38th Brigade was attacking Russian forces in this area. And we're going to be muting it now because that's probably copyrighted. But we can see the Russian trench there. We can see the Ukrainians now shelling the trench. We see them continuing to shell the trench.
Man, that dog up there in the top right corner spitting fire.
Man, they got that dog in them. But anyways, that's the end of that clip right there. While Matthew puts out an awkward laugh at that one. And we're now going to be moving on down towards the Novikakhovka area, where we also saw that a massive fire was burning in this area. We don't know much about it, but there was a huge fire burning near the occupied village of Koropki, near Novikakhovka. But beyond that, we don't really know anything about it. So we're going to be moving on from that. Just wanted to show you that for a moment. And we're now going to be moving on down towards Crimea because we saw that 2 bridge crossings were destroyed today. There was one destroyed here. Pictures included. Fire also included as well. Free of charge. That bridge has been knocked out. And moving on down towards the Chandhar Bridge area, we also saw that these bridges were knocked out as well by more Storm Shadow attacks. There's the hole that the Storm Shadow made. There's another crater that was apparently caused by another missile. And then we can see the wide-out view here. This bridge also has a giant hole in the middle of it, so it's unusable. And this bridge is, once again, unusable once more. And you can also see the massive
2 for 1.
2 for 1, believe. And you can also see the massive traffic jam back there in Crimea. And it appears that it starts right there and then goes into the horizon. So these bridges have once again been knocked out. And it appears at some point the pontoon bridge was either taken away or completely destroyed because it doesn't exist anymore either. So good news. Good news every way, and this crossing has been completely cut off as well. And so with that, we are now going to be moving up to Kyiv to cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on the 529th day of the war. And so, without further ado, speech! Speech!
Good health to you, fellow Ukrainians.
Oh.
Track Ukrainian.
Man, that look on Zelensky's face right there in that still shot was rough.
Alright, and here's the speech.
Шановні українці, українки, сьогодні мав честь привітати усіх наших воїнів повітряних сил, Збройних сил України з професійним днем, усіх наших льотчиків, зенітників, фахівців, які забезпечують технічну сторону роботи нашої авіації та протиповітряної оборони. Це день справжніх українських героїв, які, попри все, рятують життя людей, захищають від російського терору наші міста і села. Дуже важливо, воїни наших повітряних сил дають не лише нам, а усьому вільному світу чітку впевненість, що російський терор можна перемогти. Сьогодні заслухав доповідь щодо використання нашими воїнами передових систем ППО, Петріотів та Айрісів, які ми отримали від партнерів. Дякую кожній країні, кожному лідеру, які допомогли з ними. Потужні системи дуже ефективні. Вони вже дали вагомий результат не лише Україні, бо кожне знищення російських ракет у нашому небі, особливо таких як аеробалістичні кінжали, ними російські терористи довго хвалилися. Кожен успіх наших воїнів – це впевненість світу, що держава-терорист не здатна зламати спільну безпеку. Лише за один цей тиждень російські терористи застосували проти нас вже 65 різних ракет, 178 ударних дронів, із них 87 шахедів. Суттєву частину вдалося збити. Ми зробимо все, щоб український повітряний щит ставав тільки міцнішим. Саме тут, саме в нашому небі, можемо довести, що терор програє. Всі разом можемо це довести. Всі партнери. Дуже важлива відповідальна позиція кожного з партнерів щодо постачання систем ППО і ракет до них. Повний захист від терору потрібен тут, щоб потім не довелось думати, як захистити від нього ще й інші народи. Україна може виграти цю битву. Наш повітряний щит згодом гарантуватиме безпеку всієї Європи. Сьогодні ж я нагородив наших воїнів повітряних сил, поспілкувався з ними. Однаково прагнемо скоріше відчути бойове застосування F-16 в українському небі. Все для цього ми робимо. Передав сьогодні золоті зірки Герої України рідним льотчиків, які загинули в боях заради нашої держави. Вічна пам'ять кожному герою та вічна вдячність кожній українській родині, які дали нашому народу таких героїв. Хай перемога України в цій страшній війні буде найвищою шаною усім тим, хто обрав своєю долею захист нашого народу. Вже готуємось, щоб наступний тиждень ще посилив нашу державу і наші позиції. Буде нова комунікація з партнерами заради оборонних пакетів для України. Додамо ще більше змісту міжнародним заходам серпня, вересня, які вже заплановані. І Кримська платформа, і саміт перших леді і джентльменів, наша участь в Генасамблеї ООН, і Формула миру. І, звичайно, ми продовжимо і внутрішнє очищення нашої держави від тих, хто, на жаль, послаблює Україну своїми зловживаннями. Україні потрібна лише сила, лише максимальна зосередженість на тому, щоб досягти перемоги. І якщо комусь вже здається, нібито війна десь там, та щоб перемогти у війні має хтось інший, то треба повертатись в реальність. Лише всім народам ми це пройдемо. Треба щодня давати результат для України, для усіх, хто бореться заради України. Я дякую всім, хто саме так наближає нашу перемогу. Слава нашим воїнам, слава нашому народу, міцному і прекрасному. І ще раз вітаю із Днем повітряних сил, Збройних сил України. Слава Україні!
And Slava. And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Zelensky, and that is the beginning of part 2 of this stream. But before we get into part 2, because the halftime is now over, we have to recognize some of the top donors in between the last question segment and this one that have not been recognized for their massive contributions to the support of saving the lives of people in Ukraine, thanks to Doctors Without Borders. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and we have reached $5.2 thousand as the overall total on the fundraiser, so we are almost $300 above goal. So big job, and thank you very much all for the very generous support to the fundraiser tonight. And to get to our top donors, since the last time we called them off, we have a 200 from Hal Rose, the biggest one since the last time. And I don't know where I was going with that. I started babbling. But anyways, moving on, we have a 100 from Sharon Flynn, as well as Dion Yurchenko. Then we have one from Rob Eisman. We have one from Martin Hogg, or Haig. I'm not sure how to say the last name. Hopefully I am saying it somewhat right. We also have one from Super Bunker 9000, Super Action General, and we have a 50 from Steve Watkins at Work, Kenneth McCoy, Brian Blackwell, and Gene Kustra. And once again, thank you all very much for the generosity and helping to get over the goal. And Enforcer, what'd you say you?
And I would have to say thank you to every single person. I just heard a lot of channel legends there in that little list, and I know that there have been many channel legends and brand new people who have supported this fundraiser tonight and have helped it to get to where it is. $5,200, about $200 over the fundraiser goal, which is pretty impressive to think about. And I'm going to thank every single one of y'all so much once again for continuing to be dedicated to these fundraisers and helping to save the lives of people in Ukraine. Regardless of how the war has gone, and regardless of what y'all have been hearing, y'all have helped us with these fundraisers ever since the first fundraiser we ever ran, which raised, unbelievably, around $30,000. That was how big our first fundraiser was, and that was absolutely unbelievable. And since then, we have continued to always help out the folks in Ukraine with these incredible fundraisers, and have been able to save countless hundreds, if not thousands, of lives through all of the contributions that y'all have given to these fundraisers. And so thank you to every single one of y'all so much once again for y'all's support of these fundraisers, and thank y'all for believing in this channel and having trust in our channel to be able to fundraise through our channel. Of course, like we were saying earlier, there are many different ways that you could support Ukraine. And honestly, another great way that I think you could support Ukraine rather than YouTube give fundraisers on this channel is through United 24, which I believe we actually have a link in the description below to United 24 where you can go directly to their website and support them there. But nevertheless, all of y'all have been able to help out this channel and helping to save the lives of people in Ukraine, and to that, I say thank y'all. And if it wasn't for y'all, we wouldn't have been able to get here. We have raised, at this point, approximately $1.1 million over all of our fundraisers to help out folks in Ukraine. And when you think about it, that is absolutely unbelievable and amazing to think that we have all been able to unite together for 529 days to be able to make that possible. And $1 donations like the one that was just sent in by an anonymous viewer are a big part in helping these fundraisers to get to where they are. And so with that, thank you to everyone so much once again. I hope we were able to address that fairly well. And with that, we are on into the polls.
All right, and we are going to jump right into our first poll, which says Russia now says there are no grounds for a peace with Ukraine, and was Russia ever serious? 82% said no, Russia was never serious. 12% said they are just trying to save face now. 3% said unsure, and 3% said maybe, but I doubt it. And to me, it's pretty clear at this point that Russia probably would have entertained peace talks before. Of course, it wouldn't have been terms that were favorable to Ukraine, so it would have been almost pointless. But now they're trying to save face, because now they see that peace talks under any circumstance won't work, and they can't come to an agreement because Russia is very obstinate and Ukraine is determined to take back all their territory. So at this point, just doing it to save face. But Enforcer, what say you?
I think they are doing it to save face because they are in a bad position. They really can't continue on the war, yet nevertheless, they are going to continue it on just to try and prove that they can. So I would have to say it's mostly just trying to save face at this point. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, our second poll says a Moscow airport was closed today after a drone scare, and how long will the Russian public tolerate that? 42%, excuse me, 42% said the Russians will just adapt. 28% said they will lose patience soon. 20% said they are at their breaking point, and 10% said unsure. And on this one, I think the Russians will lose patience soon. The Russians aren't used to this. This is totally new to them, and it just started happening in bigger frequency here recently. So I don't think the Russians are going to adapt like the Ukrainians have, and it's probably not going to end well. It's probably going to cause some civil unrest. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say it's probably not going to end well as well, and I would have to agree it's most likely going to lead to civil unrest with what they're doing right now and the path they're on. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. I don't really have a lot to add there. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one says a Russian spokesman said, quote unquote, Putin will win 90% of the vote on the next election. And is Russia openly flaunting corruption? 86% said yes, they are. 9% said he feels confident that Putin will win. 2% said it seems questionable at best, and 2% said unsure and undecided. And on this one, to me, it comes across as Russia being openly corrupt. Nobody can predict that somebody's going to win 90% of an election before it happens. That is impossible. And for them to be saying that, the fix is in. Let's just say it that way. And Putin is going to be reelected and reinstalled back into his position because nobody really has a chance to unseat him because it's not a democracy over there. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that is certainly some kind of corruption, and nobody in the world wins by a margin of 90%, unless if you're some kind of a dictator, or unless if it's like a magical once in a million years kind of situation. Nobody wins by 90%, so that just sounds like flat out corruption, and it sounds like they're already calling the shot before they even take it. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and our last poll says, today, China fired water cannons at a Philippine vessel, and is China trying to provoke a confrontation? 69%. Nice. Said, yes, China is provoking a fight. 16% said, maybe so, it's possible. 8% said no, China is simply protecting its interest, and 7% said unsure. And on this one, it looks like to me that, I'll be totally honest, we don't have all the details. The video did show a Chinese vessel firing water cannons at a very small and what appeared to be an unarmed vessel. However, the question is, why was that vessel so close to the Chinese warship? And that seems to be something that we're missing. So while I would like to go ahead and blame the Chinese for that, I would like some more details before we reach a conclusion. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to be honest, I'm largely going to have to declare ignorance on that situation, because while I saw the video, I don't really know a lot about the story or the background of what happened there. The Chinese are very aggressive in the South China Sea, and I have a feeling that that was most likely inside of the waters nearby to the Philippines, considering that it wouldn't be traveling that far into the South China Sea. There's really no point for that. But then again, I don't know all the details to really make a statement on that at all. So I would largely have to declare ignorance on that. And so with that, we are on to the live chat.
All right. Excuse me. Moving on to our live chat questions. Up first, we have one from Mando Mavicus, who says, do you guys feel that the current Axis powers have a plan in place to bring down the West from within, which is being acted on?
Yes, absolutely. I think that both the Russians and the Chinese work to take down countries from the inside out. You know, and yeah, well, that's a really hard one to answer, you see, because people are always going to get offended at the answer because it's directed at everyone. So no one's going to get any solace, you know. And you know, honestly, I'm very. I'm going to say this. This is the best way I can put it. Having done this for 529 days. Sometimes I'm in the complete awe of the stupidity of people that we have seen every once in a while show up in the live chat. And those are the people who are out there in the public who believe stuff. And so it makes it really hard. And now I know why a lot of TV shows end up, you know, like stupefying their shows to where it's like basic, like good, bad crap, is because nobody really wants to understand anything more nuanced or complex. But the Chinese and the Russians like to play both sides of the political field in the West and pit them against each other violently, because they know that that's the best way to tear a country down, is to split the house and then have the foundation just rip itself apart. Like Abraham Lincoln said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And one thing that people don't get in the modern day is that the Chinese... and this is the way it is. I'm just going to explain it how I see it. The Chinese play the left field in politics. The Russians play the right field, and they know as long as they pit the their one side against the others violently, they both know that they'll reach the same end, which is the destruction of modern countries and the arrival of dictatorships, economic turmoil, and so on. That's just how it works. And that is something that I would say they're certainly both engaged in, because whenever you look at one side or the other, you can clearly see the influences of the Russians or the Chinese on the very far fringes of both sides. And it honestly seems to me that as time keeps going by, they keep on growing their influence in both directions. That's what I see. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And our next question goes to Susie Q, who says, I heard that China is now settling their sights on the Philippines. And what are your thoughts?
They kind of are setting their sights on expanding into the Philippines, or trying to bring the Philippines into their fold, because it's been a bit of a neutral country since the United States got rid of its territoryship or direct control over it. But that's not going to be the case anymore, because the Philippines is actually allowing U.S. forces to base themselves out of the Philippines, which is largely going to protect themselves from further Chinese expansion or bringing the Philippines into the Chinese sphere of influence. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to JC the Music Man, who says, is Ukraine getting the Taurus missile, or is it still wishful thinking?
I haven't heard them getting anything about a Taurus missile, so unfortunately I'd have to say they are not getting it at this moment. And so with that,
I will say, from what I've heard, the Germans were talking about giving the Taurus missile over to Ukraine, but it's been held up, and it looks like Germany is going to stall on the Taurus missile, kind of like the West is doing with the F-16s, or at least the U.S. is. So probably wishful thinking.
Probably wishful thinking. I would agree with that as well. And also, I haven't really heard a lot about the Taurus, so based off of that, I would assume they're probably not getting it. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Lucas Sandlin, who says, "How is Russian logistics alive?"
Russian logistics is hardly alive. It would be a bit of an overstatement to say that they're alive and well. They're just kind of hardly hanging on. So I would say they aren't really. They only have the slight appearance of being able to give the bare minimum to Russian forces, but beyond that, they can't really achieve more than that. And they're hardly hanging on because they're acquisitioning civilian vehicles like Ladas and 18-wheelers to try and transport the supplies that the Russian army just doesn't have the ability to transport in mass. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Mark King, who says, "Have you heard anything about the Russian cruise missile that was fired in December, and they found out it was Russia's?"
I've heard a lot about Russian cruise missiles being fired that were Russian, but I haven't heard about a specific one from December because I believe...
I think he's talking about that one that landed in Poland out in the woods.
I actually haven't heard a lot about that one. If we did, we covered that way back in December, and that is so long ago. That would be 8 months ago. I probably would not be able to remember that off the top of my head. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Happy Dragon, who says, "Do you think that the Russian and Chinese ships near Alaska were trying to flesh out our defense strategies and capabilities, etc.?"
Maybe, possibly, but I have a feeling that it wasn't really for a strategic aim. It was more so for a diplomatic aim and trying to make the United States believe, or at least put the idea into the mind of the United States, that the Russians and the Chinese may be united in their goals of combating the American sphere. And I think that was more so their aim, instead of trying to figure out anything like the defensive situation in that area, because they probably could find that out through flying aircraft close to the airspace of the Aleutian Islands if they wanted to, and then they could kind of figure out some stuff from there. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Avari Mandabratis, who says, "Enforcer, when East Germany reunified with Westward Germany, how difficult was their transition into NATO?"
It actually wasn't that difficult. East Germany was never recognized as an official country by the Western world. Funnily enough, many people don't know that actually, but West Germany never officially recognized the existence of East Germany, and the United States never recognized East German authority either. So one crazy thing that some people may not know about is that near the town, and let me find it. Where the hell is it? I think it's Helmstedt. Let me make sure. Yep, it's Helmstedt. Right here, this used to be the old East German border crossing. It still largely exists to this day, and I think there are some pictures that have been taken here. And so let me show this to y'all. So here we are. This is the old East German border crossing as it stands today. Some parts of it have been demolished, but this part actually stands as it would have during the Cold War. And this highway was actually allowed to be used by the U.S. and, well, really every Western military that was stationed inside of Berlin. And so they would drive their vehicles over the East German border, they would pull over here, and then they would go through the process of crossing. The thing is, though, is that if an East German border guard came up to the vehicle and asked for any identifying papers, the American soldier, or the British soldier, in these two instances, was supposed to deny them any papers or any information, and they were to request from the East German a Soviet representative from the Soviet Union. And if the East Germans did not comply, the American or British soldier would sit in that car until a Soviet representative would arrive, and they would not move from that area. We never recognized East Germany, so when the East Germans finally started to collapse, they just transitioned their economy from a central planned economy to a open market economy, and then they just transferred control of East Germany over to the West Germans, and that was really the end of the story. There wasn't really a lot of a big process in getting them back in, because the East Germans really did most of the legwork, and by the time they were done with their legwork in 1991, they ended up just looking like the rest of West Germany as far as everything operated police-wise, politically, militarily. Well, not militarily, they still used a lot of Soviet equipment. But really, the East Germans did all of the legwork, so that way when they were reintegrated into West Germany, they were just like another part of West Germany in almost every single way. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least from my historical knowledge. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Rob Eisman, who says, do you believe the Russians can wait, logistically, until the U.S. presidential elections?
No, and I don't. I've got to be quite honest, I don't really think the U.S. presidential elections are really going to have any impact on the war or the situation as far as support for Ukraine is going. Not to try and get into the politics of that, because that's a whole ordeal, and I honestly just can't stand politics. But nevertheless, with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to 180 Dude, who says, is the defense spending target that NATO sets a requirement or a suggestion? And are there any repercussions for not meeting the required amount of spending?
There are no repercussions. It is more so like a pledge. So every country that joins NATO, they pledge that they'll spend 2% of their GDP, but there's no way to really enforce that, and it's all kind of like a you have my word kind of deal as far as the agreement is run. And that's why you see that a lot of countries are below the 2% spending goals, but nothing happens to them. Is because there's really no way to enforce it, rather than through diplomacy and trying to persuade them that it would be beneficial to be over the 2% spending goal. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Andrea Fed, who says, what's happening with the water situation in Crimea since the since the HPP was blown up?
It appears that the water situation for the ZNPP, from what we understand, actually has not been that bad. The cooling pond still has enough water for the nuclear power plant to operate, and at the moment, everything appears to be fine there, from what we understand. And so the water situation hasn't been that bad, but if they wanted to draw more water into the cooling pond, that's practically impossible right now, because there is no water inside the reservoir, rather than the small river channel that now exists there. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And after a thorough examination of the spreadsheet with the chats in it, it looks like we have 3 live chat questions left in the spreadsheet. So moving on to our next one. We actually have one more that just came in the live chat, which I'll read off right now. It says, it's from Animate, who says, do you think any NATO laser systems have been or will be deployed in Ukraine?
We haven't heard about any laser systems deployed yet. So unfortunately, I don't have any news on that at all. So I'd have to declare ignorance on that. Also, Troy, if you're in Australia or a region that just does not allow people to donate to the fundraiser, that's the reason why. And so with that, we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And the third to last question of the night goes to M. Peacock, who says, has there been any update on the foreign fighter units operating in Ukraine?
We haven't heard a lot of updates. The updates are just kind of here and there at this point. They're not really steady or huge or anything. And by the way, don't spam the chat, man. You're about to annoy me with that. But it's not really like coming in steadily now. So it's really just something that you just kind of get updates on randomly, like the Freedom of Russia Legion, you'll get a little update like maybe a few weeks apart from each other, or from the Belarusian Legion or something similar. But you don't really see that a lot. You don't really see a lot of updates just across the board on all of them. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who is the lucky last person to put in the lucky last question of the night?
All right, and that viewer is Russ Rizzo. And also, by the way, on the fundraiser issue, for some reason, due to legislation in certain countries, donations are not permitted to outside charities. So if you're in a region or a country where the legislation does not allow it, there is sadly nothing we can do to change it. Otherwise, YouTube or us would be breaking the law in your country. So
if you
sadly cannot change it.
If you would like, though, if you would like to continue to yell at us, you could give us billions of dollars so that we could lobby these countries to be able to change the law so you could put $5 into the fundraiser. But beyond that, there's nothing we can do. And so with that, we are on to the final question of the night.
And that question goes to Russ Rizzo, who says, do you think the armed forces will allow the disabled to join with the advances in drone and robotic warfare?
And can you reread that one again? Because I didn't get the first part.
Do you think that the armed forces will allow the disabled to join with the advances in drone and robotic warfare?
No. Disabled will never join the military. And that's one thing that a lot of people misunderstand about normal conscription or drafts, is that the medically disabled are not brought in. You know, some people say things like, oh, you know, well, conscription is terrible because they take the mentally handicapped and they throw them. No, they don't. They don't take the mentally handicapped and throw them in the military. You get the draft notice, but then you go to, like, for example, in the United States, you would go to MEPS because they still have to make sure that you're medically qualified for service. And then you go there and they go, hey, this guy's a schizophrenic. He can't join. And then they just send them back. You know, in Russia, that's not the case. They just take anyone, you know, even the disabled, and they throw them in the military. But in most countries, conscription still has requirements, you know, like minimum requirements that these people have to fill. So, you know, you're not going to see the disabled or the mentally challenged or something similar being put into the military, because while there are advances in that kind of technology, those advances really still aren't making those people combat capable, if you know what I mean, or if you see what I'm saying. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we have reached the end of tonight's stream. I thank you all so much once again for watching. We were able to raise $5.4 thousand for Doctors Without Borders, an absolutely impressive amount, and is going to help to save the lives of many people over there in Ukraine. And so thank you all so much once again for watching. Good night, good luck, stay safe, take care, Slava Ukraini, and long live the LSA. The Elite Spring Army never dies.
All right, and good night, folks. See you all on Tuesday, and Slava Ukraine.
Yes. The Elite Spring Army sends its regards.
Русский военный корабль. Предлагаю сложить оружие и сдаться. Русский военный корабль, иди нахуй.